welcome to another Rift video. My name is Josh, and today we are inside the new Chronicles of Telara solo/duo instance for Hammerknell on the public test shard. I had to build a new spec for this run. I had tried my full-on DPS spec, and it ended up not working out so well. The first trash pull ended up killing me. So I built a hybrid kind of tank spec, and I'm using a mix of DPS and tank gear. So the story in here is that we are trying to infiltrate Hammerknell, and the Faceless Man has sent in a couple of scouts but hasn't heard back from them, and our job is to go and find out what has happened to him. We go in, and for this first set of rooms, this hallway and then the next room, we actually get help from 3 of the people that are with the Faceless Man. There are a number of elites in here, and as you see, they're kind of handing my ass to me, so self-healing is a must in here. As far as a warrior running through here, it's quite difficult if you can't heal yourself, if you're trying to run through solo, that is. If you're running in a pair with someone that does have some healing, no problem whatsoever. But even in my tanking spec with a mix of tank and DPS gear, I still had some problems with the elites. And the non-elites, however, were not a problem whatsoever. And farther in, you'll see that there's even a buff that you can get that makes things much easier. So going through here, there's a mix of golems and rune dwarves that you have to fight against. So you clear out this hall, and then the Faceless Man will then move up, as you will see in a minute. You do want to be careful, though, when pulling through here, that you only pull one at a time if you're soloing. You have to get this 3-pack here all as one, but I had, in my previous attempts, tried pulling one of the side mobs, one of those golems on the side, and ended up getting the 3 in the middle as well. That proved to be very interesting. It was fun, but, you know, it makes your butthole clench. So far, so good. As you can see here, my spec is really helping me out a lot here with the healing that I'm taking. As you can see, it's the numbers streaming by there, with my Reaver abilities and some Warlord abilities that give me healing moves with Plaguebringer, Soul Sickness. The more mobs that you have that you're fighting, the better that's going to be. And the finishing move that gives you healing based off of how many enemies it hits. That really helps out when you have to get the big 3 pulls. Now this pull, if you don't have a ranged pull, is going to be a bit tricky. That can actually pull the caster to you or a ranged silence. But once you clear those out, you should be good to go. You'll talk to the Faceless Man. He'll free Merdantix, who's right now kind of trapped, but he's guarding that door. And there are mobs that are all around this, as you can see here. You don't have to pull them, though if you want the experience for the Planar Attunement, it's probably a good idea. I just use the Rune Vessel. That gives me a massive buff in terms of damage dealt. That, if you're soloing, is something that you will want to use. If you're duoing and you're maybe a bit overpowered, it might give you a little bit more of a challenge if you choose not to use it. Or you could just feel way OP and use it anyways. You do need to be careful, though, if you choose not to clear the mobs on the side, because he does have a knockback, and you will get knocked back into them, which happened to me once, and I aggroed 2 of them and died. So once you get Merdantix down, you can loot him, and he has a plaque of achievement as well as a blue, which is decent, and a bit of gold. So all in all, for a few minutes work, it's not that bad. The Faceless Man blasts the door through, and at this point, he says you're on your own, and they're not going to help you, for whatever reason. Oh well. So this next pull is actually quite tricky because it's the next pull that has an elite. And the elites in here, if you're by yourself, do hit quite hard. And as you'll notice, I have to go through quite a number of cooldowns. But again, that Soul Sickness Plaguebringer helping me out quite a bit in taking these guys down without them hurting me too horribly. Though I do get really close, and I wait till the last moment to pop my Paladin Touch of Life. There it goes. Now I'm up to full, and I just keep beating them down. Having a good mix of single target and AoE damage is a good thing for your spec. So if you're building a specific spec to try and solo this place, make sure you have some form of AoE. If you can't self-heal like a cleric or like a chloromancer would be able to, because once you get that big elite down, you still have 2 other guys there that would be near full health to take out as well, and they can kill you just as easily when they're both teamed up if they're alive for too long. So got these guys down with a little bit of a problem with my health, obviously, but again, I'm in a mix of T1 T2 gear in this spec. I've got some raid boots, and I did have a raid 2-hander, but I'm using an axe and a shield here. Here you'll notice that there's actually a chest in the hall, which is kind of interesting. I went through it again a second time and it wasn't there, so there are random chests with random loot objects in there. Another thing is that pulling these ghosts here is a bit tricky because they'll rubber band back. I expect that's a bug that will be fixed, but it's just as easy to line of sight them. Here I got 2, busting out the Plaguebringer Soul Sickness, using my AoE healing. So it's not too difficult. These guys don't hit that hard. So I'll finish these guys up real quick, and I'll go in and I'll loot the chest, and I'll show you what's up with that, which will then lead us into the next room. So here you got a blue and some gold. Not too bad for your 50 that is looking to get started in raiding. It's not bad to get yourself ready and get into tiers. Also, it's not bad if you're waiting to get into a raid group. You can bust this out pretty quickly, especially if you're duoing and not soloing. You can get through it while you're waiting. If you don't want to go and do a T2, do a T1, wait for a Q. Just pop in here real quick. You can get 2 emblems. You don't have to worry about waiting for anyone. You don't have to rely on anyone. It's just in and out as long as you know what you're doing. So here's the 3 pull. I don't believe there's an elite in this, but the Hammer Lord, I believe is what he's called, can hit quite hard. He does end up have a pull. He'll pull you to him. So periodically you'll see me get kind of sucked in, and I got to reposition myself in order to be able to hit, because sometimes my target might end up being behind me or out of my range. See right there. But for the most part, these pulls are pretty easy to take care of. They don't hit too hard. It's just they've got a lot of health, and it takes some time. So coming into this next room, it's a large room with pretty much a row down the middle of those ghost mobs as well as an elite, and around the outside there are a couple of these golems that patrol, as well as golems that line the wall. Now, a couple of these you'll have to pull and just fight straight up, but I'm going to cut here in a second after I kill this guy. You will notice those rune vessels lining the center of the room, and those give you the same buff as they did in the Murdantics fight. So fighting this golem here, I didn't realize it until I went through this a second time, but you can actually use these and fight the trash, so it will make the trash go much quicker. There's High King Molinar and the Prince, so those are going to be your last bosses. But coming through here, as you can see, those rune vessels, those purple rune vessels, I pulled him over, line of sighted him, pop the rune vessel, and then you can just beat the living hell out of them. And especially for someone like me, where I had the Plague Bringer, where my damage that I did resulted in healing, with these rune vessels, that is amplified so much. So if you're a Chloromancer, you're going to love this. So you pull them in, your healing is going to be popping huge numbers, and you're not going to have to worry about dying, pretty much. So in one of my attempts, I don't know if it was in this recorded attempt, but I ended up pulling 3 of these ghosts at the same time, and I never dropped down below maybe 90% health. It was actually pretty cool. And there's actually one elite here, which is actually really trivialized. It's the same elite that was in that 3 pull. And as you notice, I did actually pull a ghost over here. But it's actually not too bad. I back up a bit, pull him to me, and grab another rune vessel. That's the other thing, is that the rune vessel has maybe a 6-second duration or so. Actually, I think it's closer to 8. But once that goes off, you have to refresh it, obviously. But if you take any damage, it'll interrupt that. So you have to time it right by when, especially with some of these caster mobs, it's not quite so difficult because they're always casting, and their cast bar and the cast bar for the rune vessel is actually pretty similar. So you can get that off before the missile will actually hit you. And some of these mobs in here actually swing rather slowly, so it's not going to be too big of a deal for them to be hitting you. Though what I would recommend, see here, I'm getting interrupted, but then I actually get the cast off, and I proceed to beat him down. But what I would recommend for these, if you are a melee class that has to pull them and you can't pull them from range, I would recommend doing this. Getting the buff first, and then pulling them. What I just did with that ghost. But I didn't do with this golem, because I don't know. I don't think you absolutely have to clear the room. I didn't clear the other 3-pack at the front. I did end up clearing the ghost because I didn't know how much room I was going to need. You really don't need all that much room with High King and the Prince. There are a couple of ads that he spawns, but for the most part, it's a pretty easy fight if you're using the buff. See here, I end up pulling and getting the buff before I pull. Also, if you have to do that, I actually have a root in this spec, and that actually, for soloing, makes things work quite well. Especially if you get overwhelmed, you can keep one at bay for a little while, so make sure you've got some sort of snare or stun or something like that. Now the Prince is actually a caster. He's not going to be running up into melee, and High King is going to be, they're smacking you in the face. They'll put down some circles of deathness that expand a little bit, but then they dissipate, and then there are some sort of like mine area effects that you can see that red one in the back there. However, the important thing to note is that you need to kill the Prince before you kill High King Molinar, because if you kill High King first, he bugs out, he goes up to his throne, where he would then start the next part of the event, but the Prince is still alive, and the Prince is supposed to be dead at that point. He does summon an ad throughout the fight, but it's really not of any consequence. As you can see, I'm handling the damage intake quite well. I'm running around trying to get the runic vessels buff, and I'm trying to time it so that I can get it in between a melee hit of High King and in between a spell cast of the Prince. So it does prove to be kind of difficult. See there, I just killed, or I brought High King down to 0, but the Prince was still up, so that kind of bugged them out. I'll finish off the Prince, but I went through it a second time, and rather than show you the entire fight again, I'll just finish off the prince here. I mean, it's the same thing. You're just killing the prince first rather than the king. And then there's going to be a little RP event at the end that kind of ties in to Hammerknell. So I'm finishing off the prince here. Just getting the buff, and he should be down in a second. And there we go. So that's the fight. Granted, I did it in the wrong order, but that's that. I didn't know at this point quite what was going on. But then when I ran through it again, this is what happens. This lady thing comes through. Estrode comes through the portal and then talks to High King about making a deal with him. As you can see here, the king wants his son back, who we just killed. So she makes a deal where she'll take control of his body, which she just did, and she'll res the prince. However, the faceless man, being the faceless man, comes in, he's like, "No, you didn't," and proceeds to attempt to pwn some noobs. So they res the prince, and they charge in their lasers. I'm a charging my lasers. So all the runic vessels that we were using throughout the encounter all kind of go into the faceless man, as well as the prince and the High King channeling into the faceless man. I didn't know at this point if I was supposed to try and fight again, like it was like a phase 2, but you're not supposed to. I got knocked back, as you saw. So you just go up, right click on the portal. It teleports you to the front of the instance. You get your chest. You talk to the dwarf there at the front, and you get your loot. So again, another a blue and a plaque of achievement and some gold. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed it. It was a fun dungeon to run. And subscribe if you liked it. Don't if you don't. My name is Josh, and have a nice day.